I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with greed. My name is Dennis. We're going to continue our talk about money talks. We're going to ask the question of our money. If you could speak, what would you say? Last week, Pastor Chris told us that money would say, I am a means to an end, a means to a purpose outside of ourselves. I'm not the end itself. When life is over, I'm not taking any money with me. It's going to stay here. So it's a means to an end outside of ourselves. I talked about my temptation being greed. And one of the reasons I talked about that is the definition of greed for me. That definition is an assumption that everything I have is for my consumption. Going outside of myself means I have to put others first. I have to send it away. And that's what our money's going to tell us this week, with some help from the Bible. Galatians 5, verses 16 and 17 tells us, So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. So what does it mean when we say the desires of the flesh are contrary to the Spirit? Well, we're going to learn a little more about that just a little later in Galatians 5. In verses 22 and 23, it says this, But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and blank. Well, I would have filled in that blank with another flowery description of what the fruit of the Spirit is. But that's not the way it's filled in here. Paul fills this in with self-control. Against such things, there is no law. Self-control. So that's the desire of the Spirit. When Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about all the blessings that you get by living with the Spirit. He also talked about how to pray to God, how to acknowledge God as your Father. He talked about acknowledging God as being the all-powerful and the almighty. In Matthew 6:24, he said, No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and fill in the blank. When you read this the very first time, first thought that comes to mind is he's going to say, well, God and the devil, or you cannot serve God and evil. But that's not what he puts in here. He says you cannot serve both God and money. He says you can't be greedy. And the fruit of the Spirit says that you need to practice self-discipline. So how do I practice self-discipline, living by the fruit of the Spirit, and make sure that I love God and I'm devoted to God and I put Him first? How do I do that? Later in Matthew, he's talking about don't worry about what you're going to wear or what you're going to eat, for God knows you need them. In Matthew 6:33, he says, but seek, and he doesn't just say seek God's kingdom or His righteousness. He said, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And all these other things, they'll be given to you. So, what does that look like in our life? Right? This was years and years and years ago. What does it look like today? How do we seek first God and His kingdom? How do we practice self-discipline? Let's take a look at what most of our financial pictures or our financial plans look like. We start out with taxes. and then 401k, both of which come directly out of our paycheck, and usually we don't even see them. Next, we have to pay our bills and our debts. Then we have to provide food, shelter, clothing, and entertainment for ourselves and our family if we have them. Then we put a little aside for saving. And then if we have any left, if there's any left over, we give it to others or to our church. So let's take a look at each of these categories and sort of put a label on them. If I looked at taxes, I would put the label we, right? That goes to the government and it's going to serve you and me, but it's going to serve me. Then there's the 401k, the IRA, or whatever your retirement plan is. That's going to serve me later. There's debts and bills. Well, that's me paying for what served me earlier. Then there's food, shelter, and entertainment. Well, that's me now. And then there's savings. Well, that's me just in case. And finally, if there's any left over, there's giving. That's God and others. So God says, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. So we've got to flip the script. What used to be live, save, and give needs to become give, save, and then live. It's important to understand when we say give, save, live, we do mean do all three. We don't give everything away, and nobody's asking you to give everything away. What we're asking and what God asks is that you seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And His kingdom, it's a horizontal kingdom. It's all the people around you. It's helping the poor. It's feeding the poor. It's supporting your local church. His kingdom is giving to others who follow Him, others that He loves that are created in His image. So give, save, live means that we got to look at that financial plan we talked about. And we take that plan and we say, how much goes to taxes? And the good news is the government's going to help you with exactly how much you get to give them for taxes. Next, we decide how much do we put away in our 401k or our IRAs or whatever retirement plan you have to plan for the future. And that's important as well. Then we get to seeking first His kingdom and His righteousness. Decide ahead of time a planned percentage of how much you're going to give. An easy way to do that is to look at your last tax return. See what percentage of your total income was charitable giving. Are you proud of that? Does that make you happy? Does that make you feel like a cheerful giver? If that isn't as high as it ought to be, then you know how to figure out what percentage you ought to be giving. Next, decide how much you ought to be saving. It should be at least as much as you're giving. And finally, what's left is what you get to live on. You have predetermined what percentage of your income you're going to live on. That's going to cover your debts, your bills, your food, shelter, your clothing, and your entertainment. If you use this exercise to put together a pre-planned percentage giving, you are seeking first His kingdom and His righteousness. You are putting God and others first. You are deciding on a giving plan that is outside of yourself. And you are giving, saving, and then living. Thank you for letting me share, and have a great week.